Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 500,000 times in over 145 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage.
In today's episode 203, we catch up with Joe Bonington from Joe's Basecamp in Sydney about getting back on trail after an extended period of inactivity where many of us have been housebound. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the supporters page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Joe Bonington is the creator of Joe's Basecamp Gym, Sydney's premier adventure training facility, and over the last few years, he has transitioned his training delivery into an online model and now has clients across Australia, the Tasman, up through the Pacific and beyond with clients in Singapore, Hong Kong and back to his place of origin in the UK. Joe developed his program to provide the inspiration, training and support to help his clients achieve their bucket list goals, outdoor adventures and wilderness sports and activities. Joe just doesn't talk training, he's highly experienced in the fields that he trains in, with his main goal in getting people out there and amongst it, to live large and to tear chunks out of life. We first caught up with Joe Bonington episode 32 in July of 2017 to talk about what you need to do to prepare for your hikes and other outdoor adventures from a fitness perspective. And today we catch back up with him again to talk about getting back on trail after long periods of inactivity. At the end of this episode, as usual, Jill and I will catch back up for a chat and talk about Joe's philosophy and how we see it. We hope you enjoy. Joe, thank you for taking your time to talk with Australian Hiker.
Oh, it's fantastic to be back here, Tim.
Now, before we talk about today's topic, give us a bit of a reminder about what Joe's Basecamp is about.
Joe's Basecamp. Well, Joe's Basecamp is more, it's kind of a philosophy. It's about training ordinary people for all of life's adventures with a real kind of leaning towards outdoor wilderness and adventure sports, and utilizing the growth that we can get through that using physical challenge and mental challenge, and to actually help us as grow as people and have some fantastic adventures along the way.
So how did you decide to train, I suppose, adventure seekers as opposed to just setting up a typical run-of-the-mill gym?
I mean, to be honest, I kind of fell into it. I mean, my background, my family background is firmly based in adventure. You know, I was raised in the adventure community. My dad is was one of Britain's most prolific mountaineers. And so I grew up all around that. At the same time, as well as being exposed to that and enjoying the high and wild places, I've also always enjoyed training. I've been training on and off since my teens, with a brief gap in my 20s when I was in the music industry, where I wasn't really doing anything functional and useful. But then I retook up when I just rediscovered adventure, and so I've actually been working in the physical exercise space for over 20 years now, and combining that with adventure sports and wilderness sports and activities.
Now, one of the things I like about your business is that the level of experience with your both yourself and trainers, and certainly from my perspective, as you said, you've come from an adventure background. You do a lot of this stuff yourself. How important is that in being able to recognise what people want to do and being able to help them?
Oh, it's really important. It's absolutely imperative. There's so much that you can't get from a textbook, and there's so much to actually have an understanding of what somebody goes through when they're in a mountain environment, so that you can actually talk to them. I look after people who are doing, everything, like including things like trail runs and stuff like that, which are short events that are over and done with within a day. The majority of the time, some of the ones I do are multi-day events, etc. as well. But all my mountaineers, my trekkers, my polar explorers, we're talking over people who are traveling and putting themselves under pressure for days, even weeks at a time. There's varied stimulus that they're coming across, various stresses in those days and in those times. And it really is being able to, if you've got experience and if you've been there, not necessarily to the same level as that person, but you've got an understanding, the right questions to ask. And it really is about asking the right questions. When you're actually working out a program for somebody, you're really trying to explore, well, what are they going to come up against? What are the physical abilities that they need? What are the technical abilities that they need? And what kind of mindset do they need to have? And what can we do from a physical standpoint to actually help and train all parts of those? So I'm not a mountaineering coach. Nobody's going to come to me to learn their crevasse skills and stuff like that. But if I can help get somebody that when they're really, really tired, there's been an accident, they've been up for 22 hours, and they're still in good physical and mental condition to be able to cope with that scenario, then we're on the right path. So it's doing all of that, and then also looking at the other aspects as well. So what are the nutritional impacts of what they're doing? How is that changing if they're going to altitude? How does that change how their body is going to respond to what they're doing? Because what we do at sea level is very different to what we do at altitude. So we've got all of those things to consider. So yeah, I do think it is very important to at least be outdoors focused and to have an understanding, a natural understanding, and a wanting to learn and to understand the environments that these people are putting themselves in. And in a way, they're entrusting their lives to you as well with some of the more dangerous sports.
Okay, now let's get on to the main topic for today. So over the past 2 years, large parts of Australia have been impacted by enforced lockdowns. And for many hikers, our ability to get out on trail or to go to the gym has been greatly impacted. What's been your experience about the impact this has had on people's general fitness?
In general, it hasn't been good. The very, very committed have tried their hardest. I've got a couple of my ambassador athletes, Richard Stevenson and Gareth Andrews, who are both polar explorers. They've been going hard. They're very focused, very driven. But Gareth, for a whole year, was in complete lockdown in Cardiff whilst I was coaching him, and he couldn't get outside of his house. And his kind of training involves dragging tires and on a harness and stuff for hours on end, as well as going on long runs, as well as his strength training. And so even though the will was there, it was very challenging. And that is for somebody who's very different. Now, people like Gareth are a small proportion of the kind of people I train. The vast majority of the people I train are ordinary people who are just really wanting to do something special. They're wanting to get out into the bush. They're wanting to experience nature, etc. Now, those guys some of them they've really struggled. They've really struggled with motivation. People who've had their trips cancelled, they've, so as well as being locked down, or they haven't been able to access the bush because they're in a 5-kilometre radius. And we have seen some people give up. And in fact, my whole social media presence during that time and the kind of posts I was putting out were really trying to address that more than anything else. Yes, it was, giving tips on what you can do with what you've got, but it was really trying to hammer home, look, don't give up. The world is 20% of what happens to us and 80% of our attitude towards it.
Yeah. I think it's. I must admit, I found in this latest lockdown, it probably had a bigger impact on me. Partly because it was a more severe lockdown. We in Canberra had a 9-week lockdown period. The gyms weren't open, and while we could get out and walk for an hour a day, it was nothing compared to what I was used to doing. And even though I had a small home gym, I just wasn't in the mental mindset of wanting to do anything. It just sort of, mentally, it was probably just as much of a struggle as physically.
I mean, that's where people like me really come in, because you got to remember with your gym membership, you go to the gym, you kind of almost make an appointment with yourself to go and do it. You're going out, and it's got a kind of ritual that's attached to it. Whereas wandering down to the downstairs gym that's set up in your garage or whatever, it doesn't have any of that. You can always go, well, look, I'm just going to make this phone call and then I'll go downstairs. I'm just going to finish off this, whatever it is, and then I'll go downstairs. And then before you know it hasn't happened, and other things are closer by. We've got our kitchen at home, which we don't have at work, so we've got more temptations. So people find that they're grazing more when they were in lockdown. So they're moving less, not as motivated. They haven't got the disciplines and the rituals in place that they had before, and so everything kind of drifts to the side. So with what the people who had coaches or were the gyms that were offering online were actually getting a lot better or doing a lot better by their customers, because if you're on your own, you're on your own. But if you've got an online coach, then you've still got accountability to somebody. So that was one of the things that we saw. And at that stage, my gym was, it was closed, but we still had a membership base. And I found that the ones who were actually actively working with me online and wanted to engage online, some of them needed chased a bit, but were actually getting a lot higher hit rate on the percentage of workouts that they were completing than people who weren't. I'd phone up members of the gym who'd opted not to train and see how they were going. So I'd be saying, okay, so what are you doing? Are you staying exercise? Oh, look, I'm just going to leave it for the moment. I'm going to restart when when everything opens up. And the trouble is that just leaves you further and further behind.
I think that's the thing. I think, if you wake up in the morning and think, oh yeah, I'm just feeling, I'll have a sleep in, and there's no consequence. You're not breaking an appointment. You're not, don't have someone waiting for you. It's so much easier to do. But when you do physically have to, you've booked an appointment to go and see somebody, whether it be online or whether it be in a physical gym, you really are held to account.
Yeah, and this is the thing where all the psychologists were saying things like, try and keep your routine as similar as it was before. That is so true. We are creatures of habit, and habit really, and rituals really, really work for us. So all the way through the lockdown, I personally get up at 4 a.m. And all the way during the lockdown, even though I didn't have a 5:30 class to drive down to and a gym to open and organise, I still got up at exactly the same time. And I think that holds you in good stead if you can keep to those rituals. I know that they've had talking with my now deceased father-in-law, Mick, who was a POW on the Changi Railway, and he used to say that all of their guys, because they kept up all of their traditions. So all the Aussie soldiers who he was with, they still kept everything up. You know, they shaved when they could, they paraded, they did all of this kind of stuff that just kind of kept everything going the same as it was before, even though they're in these horrendous conditions. And he said some of the other nationalities who didn't have that discipline were the ones who just basically gave up and died.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. As you say, we are creatures of habit, and you know, it's easy to just maintain a habit, but once you lose it, you've got to get back into that routine again.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, now that the states and territories are in large opening up again, what should people be doing after extended periods of lockdown to get themselves fit and get back out on trail, particularly if they're looking at doing longer hikes?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things going on here as well, because we've been in these home environments. But look, we in the 21st century isn't conducive to monocyclical movement, i.e. Us walking. You know, it doesn't lend itself, which is why so many of us get hurt, get niggles, get aches and pains, because we're hunched over desks, we're in front of computer screens, we're sitting in a position where our hamstrings and our hip flexors are really tight, we're slouched over, our tummy's relaxed, so our core is weak, and all of this. Now, so that was before lockdown. So now, with lockdown, where we're now not in office chairs, we've been sitting at dining room chairs and dining tables and coffee tables and all this kind of stuff. It's worse. I'd say that chiropractors, osteopaths, and physiotherapists are making an absolute fortune at the moment with all the issues that have been happening because of the lockdown. And so when we do get back out onto trail, and if we're looking at doing, and especially for people who are looking at doing through hikes, it really is a case of slowly. I think the things that I really want people to focus on, which unfortunately are the things that people get really funny about. People really think it's about getting the kilometers under their belt or doing the strength training, etc., because it all of a sudden makes them feel like they've done something. But the mobility work, unfortunately, it takes a long time to make yourself more mobile. There's a gymnastics coach, American gymnastics coach called Coach Sumner, and I think he says that it's a minimum of 8 months or six to 8 months to get decent movement changes in connective tissue. So we need to start that now. You know, we need to start it 6 months ago, but the next best time is now.
Yeah.
So starting in a flexibility routine is really, really important. Where we are different because of the things that we do. So, and this is where I struggle with some people just going in and doing yoga, straight yoga, and especially the softer styles of yoga, because we need to build flexibility with stability. Because, you know, when we are moving over land, we've got to have this really strong core. Our hips have got to be stable. Otherwise, we're going to end up with either back and hip problems or with knee problems. So we do these techniques that we call end range strength, where we look at putting ourselves into end ranges, but loading those end ranges as well. And this is really, really good because it gives us the mobility and the extra mobility that we need. But it also means those times when you're tired at the end of the day, you're coming back, you're losing elevation, you're coming down to a riverside campsite, and you're coming down a valley, and it's dark, and you stumble. Now, we might not necessarily be able to stop somebody rolling their ankle, but if a limb goes out to one angle very, very suddenly, and it's strong, it's a lot less likely to end up tearing and to end up straining than it is if you are just flexible. And if you're long and weak, we want to be long and strong. So that's one of the things that we do. So it's starting with some end range strength work. And I'd probably do 1 or 2 of those sessions a week. And then also working on the key areas for hikers. So that really is strengthening the legs, the knees, and the hips. So making sure that we've got decent strength and strength endurance in those muscles, and then building up our training volume from then. Just starting with 1 midday walk and 1 weekend walk, and then building it up from there. Not going too crazy too fast.
I must admit, I think I'm probably guilty of what you've just described. I've always gone to the gym. I've always done strength, more so than cardio, but it's always been strength. I've done cardio. And I do realise that I'm supposed to be doing a flexibility and mobility work, but it's sort of, for some reason, it's just mentally, it's just not there. It's like, okay, I'll just lift weights and do that sort of stuff.
80% of the time, 80% of the people I talk to, they kind of grunt at me and go, oh, okay. It's you're not alone by any stretch of the imagination.
And I must admit, I've had some physical issues over the last sort of 6 weeks, and it's been because I've probably, for the most time in my adult life, I've probably been the unfittest I've ever been. I've just been doing very little. I was so used to walking to work, and I'd typically walk 10 or 12 kilometres a day, where when I was working from home, I was probably lucky to be doing 3 or 4, and that was just around the house. So, it's unfortunately, I paid the price, and it made me realise that, okay, I need to be serious about what I'm doing here.
Well, let's do a little case study. Do you mind me asking what issues you've got going on?
My problem is I've got a series of issues that pretty much run down the right side of the body. So I've got a crushed disc in my lower back. Yeah. I've got hip flexor issues. I've got, I can't remember what it was, but a number of years ago, I either snapped a tendon or a muscle and just ignored it. So it's obviously reattached itself somewhere, but you can see a physical difference between my right calf and my left calf. But as a result, it's all along that right-hand side. So when I have hip issues in particular, and I have had knee issues a couple of years ago, and just doing the trainings resolved those. But it's just that combination of collected injuries over the years that if I don't keep myself fit, particularly my back, if I keep fit, my back's fine. If I don't keep fit, my back pays for it.
And look, totally. And that's, as we often find, it's just consistent movement. Any movement is better than sporadic movement. You could have the best program in the world, but if you only do it sporadically, that is not as good as doing an average program consistently.
Yeah, I must admit, I found because I'm now back at my workplace, and I've been walking to work, and that's made a huge difference to what it was, the previous sort of 6 to 8 weeks prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, with the things like that, it's actually, without actually having to take you through a full assessment, but it's looking at that right side. Okay. Stuff always refers up or refers down the body. So if we have an issue at the ankle or the calf, then that will tend to end up giving us problems, say, at the knee, etc. So working on both ankle mobility and strength as well, and that's through both dorsiflexion and plantarflexion. So that's both pulling your toes towards you and pushing away. So doing calf raises and what we call tibialis anterior raises as well. And then with that stability, that cross vertebrae, so that is integrated core work. I see too many people just doing lots and lots of planks, and they're shaking and they're sweating, the sweat's dripping off the end of their nose, and their whole bodies are shaking as they're desperate to hold this plank for another 30 seconds. But the trouble is with the plank, I mean, look, it's a great exercise as part of a global thing, but when we're walking, when we walk, as our right foot goes forward, our left hand goes forward. And so that's basically our right hip and our right shoulder moving, our body's rotating, and our core is trying to hold us stable and hold the hips stable and connect the movement between that, the right hip and the left shoulder, or the left hip and the right shoulder. So we want our core exercises to reflect that. We wanted to be doing things like bear crawls, dead bugs, bird dogs, all these movements where we've got limbs moving at different times, and they're graded. So you might start off just moving one leg, and then you might be moving one leg and one arm, and then it'll be one opposite leg and opposite arm, etc. So doing those kind of core-based exercises, and then also making sure that we're doing exercises that are strengthening the posterior chain as well. So working up as our whole core and working the back of our core and our erector spinae and the QLs and multifidus, which are all those muscles which go up the back as well.
Yeah, it really is I suppose, as you say, it's a holistic sort of thing. It's sort of it's a matter of doing it regularly and making sure you are targeting the right sort of muscles and getting things happening.
Yeah, totally. It's it's getting that going and doing things in order is really, really important. And that's why if we can work on those foundational things first. So what we tend to do is we tend to take people more single limb at the start, what we call structural balance. So we're trying to gain balance and integrity between both sides of the body. Meanwhile, whilst we're getting you going out, getting you hiking, getting you walking again, etc. as well. And then once we've done that base, we then start looking at global strength. So that is more where we're looking at our overall relative strength. So that is the classic big bang for your buck exercises like squats and deadlifts and things like that. And then at the end, we then go back to specializing and doing things which are very more specific towards the actually event that we're going to be doing, or the activity that we're going to be doing once we build that global strength. So it tends to go from single limb to both limbs back to single limb.
Yeah.
That's how we structure ours anyway. And on a point you actually mentioned, I think you mentioned before that you sometimes, you'll do a bit of cardio at the gym as well. I actually have strong views around that as well. So you, as a hiker, you've just got to be careful how much cardio you're doing and what kind of cardio you're doing external from your trekking as well, especially when we talked about through hiking. So, with the through hiker, we're talking about, your heart rate when you're trekking for a long period of time is basically submaximal day after day after day after day, with a couple of days rest here and there. But, if you're at altitude, you'll probably use those to do an acclimatization day. And even, if you're doing an Aussie-based overland trip, you might use that rest day to actually go and do a bit of a side hike, etc.
Yeah.
Because of that, we want people to become as efficient as possible in those ranges, in those heart ranges. And what the trouble is, what we see people doing is spending way too much time because they can. They'll maybe go running. They'll take up running, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And I do a lot of running myself, and I spend most of my training time, except for my long hikes, is actually done running. When we're going on these kind of trips, we're basically going submaximally day after day after day. We might be walking, anywhere between 4 and 8 hours a day, sometimes more. But we're not spending much time with our heart rate really, really high. There's going to be little bits where it creeps up there, when we're kind of, if we've got a bit of a scramble to do, etc., or if we're mountaineering and we've actually got to start doing a couple of pitches of mixed climbing or something. And then we want to be as efficient as we can at those submaximal levels, and we want the body to be as efficient as it can at those submaximal levels, so that we've trained the body to utilize the right amount of energy, or the right types of energy sources, the right energy pathways, so that we can actually keep on going longer for stronger for more. So, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I spend a lot of time running. I'll do my big hikes at the weekends, but during the week, I'm spend most of my time running. But it's running at the right levels, and making sure that we're not spending too much time at in what we call using the glycolytic energy system, which is an unsustainable energy system that needs constant refueling, and also has lots of side products in the forms of lactic acid, and that we want to be making sure that we are in a more lipolytic state, so we're just getting really, really efficient at the oxidative state, a truly aerobic state that we can just keep on going on and on and on forever, because we're just burning a combination of oxygen and fat. So there's ways to do that. And so we have to make sure in our training, if we are going down to the gym should really be for our strength training, and just do strength training is a very, very important part of what we do. But the gym should just be for that. And we can save the other 20% of more high intensity work, because we do want to do some of that work. It helps just lift the level a little bit. It helps us cope with lactic acid and things like that better, and it just helps us be able to lift those glycogen stores, the level of where those glycogen stores are. So we only want to be doing a bit of that. Now that would be better to be done actually outside on a hill, etc. But if not, it is the kind of thing that you could do inside on an exercise bike or on a treadmill. I'm not a big fan of treadmills, but it's as long as it's just that 20% that you're getting your sweat on with.
Okay, that's good. Now, one thing that I've noticed over the last couple of years is the rise in online training options on offer, and I believe that's the model you now use. How did you come to transition to online training, and what do you see as the pros and cons of this type of training as opposed to the face-to-face stuff?
How did I transition to online training? We'd actually started an online model a couple of years ago, just before kind of COVID, or just as COVID was kind of kicking off. And I'd always known, basically for your listeners who don't know where we are, I'm based on the northern beaches of Sydney, which isn't exactly, it's not Jackson Hole in Wyoming or Chamonix in France or Queenstown in New Zealand. So we've had this adventure-based gym that's all about adventure travel and training for multi-day trail runs and hikes and mountaineering, etc., based on the northern beaches of Sydney. And so my dream was to build a mecca for outdoor and wilderness training. But really the opportunity for me is online. We already had people contacting us from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from the UK, where I'm originally from, and then a lot of people who heard about where we were, Australians and Sydney-siders, but just couldn't get to the gym. So we started building our online presence then. And then really, COVID forced our hands. That COVID has been awful for the fitness industry. It really has been really, really tough. We were obviously some of the first businesses to get shut down. And with the break in the middle, with consumer confidence completely shot, people weren't rejoining, etc. But then when you take into account as well, most of these ordinary gyms are mainly lifestyle members and people looking for weight loss and things like that. But mine, I'm all my members were training for events and training for adventures. And so even when things opened back up again in the middle, the borders were still closed and all the events were still cancelled. So my hand was forced, and we, with a very heavy heart, eventually had to say, no, look, we can't sustain this. So we actually had to close the gym permanently, which was sad. But at the same time, it was, I'm a firm believer that the world is a benevolent world, and that all things happen for a reason, and that there are lessons in all things. And a friend had once told me, a friend and mentor, Howard, had once said that it's very hard for a jockey to ride the same two horses in the same race. And we'd been finding that our online model hadn't been getting the attention it deserved, because I was at that time still always being dragged back into trying to pivot with the main gym and the actual gym, which costs a lot of money to run. And so I was getting dragged into that. And then I also wasn't giving that as much attention as I needed to, because I was really trying to build this online. And so it's a case of doing two things not quite as well as I should. And so that's when we decided, well, no, I think with the way that the world is now, and also with what we're offering, that in actual fact the gym needs to close, and it did, and it's now we're in a lot better position, and I'm very, very excited by the things that we're going to be offering and the people that we're working with, etc. So we've been having chats with the Australian Himalayan Foundation, with whom I'm a member, and with the North Face, who I've got a very strong relationship with, about building something that we can. It doesn't just cover the training. We're helping people in all aspects of their adventure journey, whether it's from planning to fundraising to the training aspects itself, to mindset. We've got. I've been working with a good few solo hikers as well, and one of the big things that comes up for them is mindset as well. So, and also the same there with some of my mountaineers. So we've been looking at all of that and looking at people that we can partner with for that. You asked me. You said, so what are the pros and cons of it? Well, it depends. It depends if you mean from the consumer end or from the business owner's end. From the business owner's end, there's, the overheads of running a gym and running that bricks and mortar model are just horrendous. I won't go into them here, but I'm sure anybody out there who we had a very, very large space, a commercial lease, and we had 10 staff, and it was this kind of gargantuan thing that needs to be fed constantly. Whereas with the online model, from our perspective, is a lot more fluid. The overheads are a lot lower. And because of that, the margins are better. And those margins allow me to then put back into developing even better and better products, and a better delivery for you guys, for the consumer. From the consumer's end, from the trekker and the mountaineer's end, the advantages and disadvantages. Look, I'll be, absolutely very honest. Online training isn't for everybody. Some people, we offered a group strength and conditioning class at our gym, and some of those people, it was as much about that aspect, about going down and having a crack with some people that they knew, as it was about the training itself. Admittedly, that did tend to be, even though we were a very adventure-focused gym, we did have a certain amount of lifestyle members, and that tended to be, for those people, really, really were after that. Most of the more adventure-focused, they're there for a purpose. And so if you take that purpose online and they now just go and get themselves a cheap gym membership at any old gym, what they're paying for with me is not the gym membership. They're paying for the expertise and the knowledge of what I do, and still having access to that, and also to a certain extent to my networks as well. If they don't mind not having that more social aspect and having a chat in the class and going for a coffee afterwards with a bunch of other people in the class, then it's fine. And then also we kind of counteract that, because we have group calls. So we have, I have all my people jumping on a call every Tuesday night, and we've got all kinds of people in there, from young female solo hikers to grizzled old ex-Royal Marine officers who are doing bikepacking adventures, to my polar explorers, Gareth and the like. So we've got all this great diversity of people getting on and actually getting inspired by what they're hearing from other people doing as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. As you say, I suppose we're so used to physically driving or walking, depending on where we live somewhere, and turning up at a location. But I think, as we discussed earlier on, it's the commitment. Even if you're doing online, that somebody is waiting on the other end of the line at whatever time of the day it happens to be. And if you're not there, they will notice that you're missing. There's nowhere to hide.
That's it. That's it. With the model that I run, they've got freedom. So they do have the freedom, that the accountability comes in me chasing them, because they have the freedom to train when they want. I write the program, but I give them videos for everything I want them to do. And then they go away and do it, and they're allocated to do certain things on certain days. But if they haven't done it, I can actually see that they haven't done it. So I fire them through a message, contact them by SMS and through the app that I utilize. And then also they've got to face up every Tuesday as well with the rest of the group as well. So we've got the double whammy of accountability there as well. So it really works. I'm really, really enjoying it. It's funny. I at the gym, I'd become a manager and business owner, and so I was essentially off the tools a lot. I was overviewing people's programming and kind of looking at a very global level at people's annual training plans, etc. Whereas now, I'm back to being a solopreneur, and it's just me and the thing that I love doing. I do love coaching people, and I do love the communication side and seeing what's happening in people's worlds and what are the challenges that they're facing. And everybody's got challenges, and then seeing how we can manage those and what we can do to get around them and each nuances, etc. So it's great.
Now, so from your perspective, what's your next big outdoor adventure that you have coming up?
Well, yeah, we've been thinking about this a lot. I'll be honest. Since COVID happened, and because the business shutting down, I never knew how complex and also how expensive shutting down a business is. But then, so I've actually only got out of Sydney for the first time last weekend when we went and visited mates in Wollongong. But so I've been doing all of my trails all around the northern beaches for the last year. So I'm going to start off with a couple of solo overnighters and bits just up in Ku-ring-gai and places like that. Then after that, my big adventures that I've got my eyes onto, my next big overseas trip is I'm really desperate to go to an area of Nepal called the Upper Dolpo. I've got a friend of mine, Bill, who's usually my expedition doctor on my trips, has always been chasing me to get up there. So I'm going to go and explore there. I'm going to do that by myself. I'm not going to take any clients up. I like to go and check things out a bit first myself, and just wander around at my own pace and meet people and make relationships and have fun. So I think I'm going to go and do that. I still have in the back of my mind the really, really big trip that I would love to do, apart from doing something like the Himalayan Traverse, is actually an Aussie trip, and that is, I want to take a camel. Me walking and pack a camel and walk across the top end.
Okay, so we've been talking with Joe Bonington from Joe's Basecamp about getting back on trail after long periods of inactivity. Joe, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. That was really, really great to talk to you again, mate.
So that was the second time we'd caught up with Joe Bonington. We'd previously caught up with him with episode 32. And I must admit, even though that was probably around about 3.5 years ago.
It's a little while ago.
In fact, it was 4 years ago since we last caught up with Joe. He never ceases to amaze me, just the passion he has for training.
Yeah, his enthusiasm hasn't waned in any way, and, clearly it's been a difficult at least 18 months, if not close to 2 years. But, yeah, his passion is definitely there and probably renewed. I think there's a bit of a sense of, optimism and enthusiasm about the future.
The things that I took away from that interview, and as I said, we talked to Joe previously, I am very much into physical fitness, but I tend to be a look after the things that I know and the things that I think do me good. But that's not necessarily the case. And I think probably the biggest takeaway from that episode is knowing how to get the right balance in the training you do. The assumption always is, let's go to the gym and lift heavy weights, or let's do lots of hiking, or let's do lots of cardio. And, from Joe's perspective, it's getting the balance right, getting the mobility right. And for me, mobility is probably my weakest area.
Weak. That's possibly non-existent, not weak.
So yeah, I mean, I in my own training have sort of so focused on physical strength and endurance, but I knowingly tend to ignore that mobility side of it. It's something that I don't necessarily enjoy doing, so as a result, I don't. But I also then pay the price for not having done it either.
Yeah, look, I did like the focus on strength and core, and when you were talking about some of the issues that you have, not just the sort of short-term immediate things that flare up, but the kind of whole body description, you could, and then Joe talked about it afterwards, you could tell he was really thinking through, now what would help him in this occasion, and how do you overcome some of the things that, you've had all sorts of injuries over the last couple of years that have hampered your hiking. So I did like that. It was not just about, how do you get fit, how do you get that perfect shape, and how do you attain the weight. And in fact, that conversation was nothing about that.
I think the thing as well is, and for me, as I mentioned during the episode, this last lockdown And for those of us in Canberra, it really was fairly minor compared to...
Yeah, we've got nothing to complain about, but we're still complaining.
Yeah, compared to New South Wales and Victoria,
Oh,
which
Victoria.
have had much longer periods.
Yeah.
But I think compared to last year, I struggled to do a lot of exercise. I mean, the gyms were closed both times, but previously we were able to get out bush as long as we socially distanced. And, so I could spend a lot of time walking and hiking, whereas this time we were limited to a certain amount of time per day. I do have
distance from home.
Distance from home. I do have, we do have a home gym, but during the middle of winter, the garage isn't heated, so it was really a struggle to try and.
You're looking for excuses now, aren't you?
Yeah, looking for excuses to get out, and I think that's the thing. I think people do look for excuses, and I'm no different here. And I think one of the things about going to a trainer, however often you do it, is having someone hold you to account. And if you don't turn up, if you don't, if you're using an app or having to keep record, and all of a sudden Joe notices that you're not doing what you're supposed to be, he'll get in contact, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to do this. It's a hard place to hide, and I think having a trainer, it's not necessarily going to be for everyone. And as Joe mentioned, distance training or online training isn't for everyone.
Yeah, the thing for me though is, I mean, I know he talked about the accountability, but for me, when you've got a personal trainer, and I don't have one at the moment, but when I did, if you have respect for who they are and what they know and what they're trying to do, then you don't actually want to let them down anyway. So for me, it's sort of a different thing. It's not about them keeping an eye on me. It's about me respecting them and the contribution that they're trying to make to me.
The other key thing, and this is something I've always been aware of, Joe is very much focused on adventure training. He's not just a weight loss or a lifestyle coach like a lot of the gyms and a lot of the personal trainers tend to be. His focus is on adventure training, hiking, mountaineering, polar exploring. He's got a female hiker who's actually based in Canberra who's doing a long-distance trail. So, he has been into that sort of lifestyle. He's got the experience and knowledge firsthand to be able to transfer that back to his clients. And that's one of the biggest things. I think you can use a lot of theory to develop training programs, but having the first-hand knowledge makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think, he was talking about that mental endurance and mental agility as well, about, he used the example of, you've had a long day, something's gone wrong, you need to respond, and, you need to draw on your whole self to be able to do that, not just your physical self. So, yeah, he does get that, and I think that's, it's that whole person, whole body kind of development that you get with him. So, Tim, are you going to go and be trained by Joe?
I hadn't actually thought about this before the episode, but I hadn't realised that I was struggling. And again, it's from my perspective, it's not because I'm not strong enough or don't have the time. I just need someone to push me along a bit. And I think, as I said, Joe is very passionate about this. So it is certainly my intention. I've had a very brief contact with Joe on this, that I do want to start training with Joe, and my intent is to start the training process at the beginning of next year.
So why are you waiting? Sorry, hopefully if we get into Desi, we'll be able to go hiking over Christmas, and you might need to be a bit fitter for that. I'm just saying. Yeah,
it's more of I'm one of these sort of people. I tend to be focused on doing things, and for some reason the start of the year makes sense to me.
Oh, so, okay. This is sounding like an excuse now.
So no, as I said, it really, from my perspective, mobility is probably my real issue. And I think if I can get the mobility sorted out, I think the other stuff will tend to flow from that. So I think it's worth it from my perspective. I still want to be hiking in another 20 or 30 years and doing the big days and the big distances, and having a bit of help will certainly, I think, go away towards that. Okay, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And as I said, I got a lot out of this myself. Even this is the second time that I've talked with Joe on similar sorts of topics. And I think it's worthwhile if you're struggling after long periods of being locked in your house and getting back on trail. It's worthwhile considering getting help from someone like Joe to help you get back out bush again. That's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.